just behind us, we have a keyword, security for a changing planet. What do we want to discuss first? Security, changing planet? What's IDE's take on that?
Well, I think it's coming together because the change creates the need for security. Christopher said the right words, which are, it's not about only the climate change, it's about managing the water cycle in the right way. I think that what we're seeing today is that the water cycle puts a great risk on the availability of water, on securing water for people of the world. And in that, you have two main trends which needs to be taken. One is that we have to reuse every drop of water we have on the best way. And second, we have to realize that it's not enough in most places, and then we need to have desalination as an additional source. The moment we understand that those are the sources that we have, reuse of water, which is doing all that cycle from precipitation all the way through the ground back to our users, but then let's try to recycle it again and again and again. And we're familiar with the DPR trends, which is growing now because people realize what's good for astronauts must be good for everybody, that we can recycle all the water and make it valuable again. But since we're kind of losing part of that water cycle, and that makes sense, then we need a desalination. And with that in hand, with both of that, we have to ask ourselves about environment. What's going on with the environment of those issues? Is it only about the security? And the real issue is that obviously we can do all of that in better, sustainable way. The technologies are there, obviously. And the question is, are we going to be supported to use more sustainable ways? Now that people start to realize that for carbon emission, there is a cost. You cannot just emit as much as you like. There is a cost behind it, and carbon capture is becoming an issue. So now is the time that you can say, okay, desalination, carbon capture, carbon emission reduction, can we combine it in a way that will create value together?
You mentioned a lot of elements which are super interesting one by one. If I want to nail it down, would that qualify to sustainable desalination? And what's your take at IDE on sustainable desalination?
We came with a quite interesting approach which says what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. We didn't invent this sentence, but this should be part of the way we do desalination as well. A year ago, we started the process of doing an LCA, the life cycle assessment of desalination plant, which will enable us to quantify what is the carbon emissions coming out of the desalination plant. We've done that. And we also developed the methodology to do that for future plants. So we already analyzed our next plant, which is going to be online in 2024, which is SOREC 2. And we find out that using several technologies that we implemented there, we could have cut down 30% of the carbon emissions quantified by ACA, not by marketing phrases, but by quantifying. We're able to find that it is 30% more efficient on carbon emissions. And if you take the quantities that this plant is going to produce, multiply by the saving, you're talking about saving of over 150,000 tons of CO2 emissions, which are going to be saved. So measure, identify, implement technologies which are available, some with us, some with others, but you can implement it and then you can reduce the carbon emissions. Now, some people would come and ask, isn't that more costly than just doing the regular desalination? And I would ask, what is the cost of not having water on one side, which means you need a desalination, but what is the cost of the carbon capture on the other side? And if you combine both, and you say, on the same time I'm doing desalination, I'm also doing carbon capture, or I'm doing carbon reduction, emission reduction, am I doing that on the same time is actually much cheaper than to do both projects in parallel. And that's the way IDE sees that as our mission, if you like, in helping that.
How do you reap the rewards of the carbon reduction? Because as you said, you can only improve what you measure, but if a tender is out to give a desalination plant and you're not measuring carbon capture, then you can be as good and as whited than you wish. You're not going to get the reward.
Well, actually, it's a great question because in the end, people need to decide whether they just talk about things or they really want them to happen. And we know that if you want things to happen, it has to be part of the rules of the game. You go to places where part of the funds which are funding projects or some of the governments which are funding projects, the moment they're starting to say, yeah, but I want it to be more environmentally friendly, then it's very easy to people to come and say, yeah, I'm doing that more and that, I'm doing that. But the moment they'll say, this is part of my evaluation, measure it, use an LCA, prove me that you are going to take it down. And if you're not meeting a standard, you're out. Or I'll give you so percent of advantage of having that in the calculation of the winning factor, then it is becoming green. Definitely, if we will not see the customers, the financier, and all the relevant bodies focusing on that in a way which is enabling technology companies to deliver better solutions, it will not happen, or it will happen at a lesser extent. The additional cost, that's an important claim. The additional cost of doing them better is not that high. So it's not that we're going to double the cost of the water. I'm quite confident if you'll come to any customer and say, in 5 or 10% additional cost, I can reduce 30% of my carbon emissions, that people say, wow, that's very interesting, right? That's exactly the game.
Is the 5 to 10% figure an example, or
Yes.
is it?
Actually, SOREC 2 that we're building now with 30% less emissions than the regular technologies, with the one of the lowest price of water in the world. Obviously, is a mega project. So mega project is more efficient. But again, we were able to reach water prices which are really, really low with 30% less carbon emissions. Obviously, even in cases which are not as good as SOREC 2, we can still be in 5, 10, depends. People need to realize, desalination is not a washing machine. You just don't plug it and it works. It is something that you're creating a business case which is built on a lot of elements which relates to the specific geography, the specific needs of the customer, the specific conditions of the sea, a lot of specifics. And then a good technology company is taking all those problems and create a mix and match and some ingenuity of solutions which bring the right value. It is a toolbox that a company should develop with lots of ways of how to reduce carbon emissions, looking at the specific problem and then creating that solution. I do believe that in most cases, it is not much more expensive. And in some cases, like I mentioned, SOREC 2 is actually cheaper than the previous one.
We're between us. Nobody's watching, nobody's listening. So you can give me a secret. What's the trick to reduce the carbon emissions?
There is no trick. There is no magic wand. There is no trick. One thing you can say, let's use renewable. When you go to renewable and you go to solar as the main renewable source that people are speaking about, solar is like 20 to 22% typical hours of the year are relevant for solar. You have two ways of trying to use that solar in a better way. One way is to produce more water during those hours. And if you shift more water production to those hours, immediately you created some value. There is another way of saying, why don't I put batteries and I'll store the energy and then I can produce during all the day. The problem is that batteries has their downside on environmental aspect as well. In IDE, we have calculated to see what is more economical, to have a bigger plant and shift the production toward the more environmentally friendly hours, or to use batteries and actually producing variating flows of water creates better value on the emissions. So that's one of the elements in our toolbox. We have various elements in that toolbox, but this is one very simple to understand. Everybody get that. But then why don't you do carbon capture on site? If you use energy, and in a lot of desalination plants, you have the power plant on site. Why don't you do carbon capture with that? We have the technologies for that as well. So that's another way. And then you can think about, can I produce my chemicals on site?
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I will not need all the carbon emissions which are being carried with the chemicals transported to the site, because I produce it on site, so I don't have transportation. And if I use enough renewable sources, then even my chemicals which are being produced are there. Everybody's talking about brine mining, seawater mining. This is definitely things that can be done. It's a full toolbox. It's not a trick. It's not a magic one, and definitely not a washing machine. You look at the problem and you try to use different ways of how to optimize that. And in some of the cases, it can be even more cost efficient. In some cases, it has to get the benefits coming from the customer saying it is important for me. I'm willing to pay a little more to get the same, because he knows that sooner or later he's going to pay for the carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we take care of that in advance and reducing the overall which we need?
You said it's not a washing machine. It's not a magical wand. The customer as well can be different from geographies to geographies.
Absolutely.
With IDE, you were active in the US, you're active in South America, you're active in the Middle East, you're active in Israel. Do you have to adapt the way you design your plant, you operate your plant, and you go at the market places by places, or do you evangelize so that everybody adopts the right best practices?
Geography means a lot because the challenges are different. Just imagine going to Chile, which is a very long country. The geography makes you have certain size of plants.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you be more exposed to very expensive chemicals because of the long transportation, etc. So there are things, but on the other hand, Chile is very advanced with renewable solar. So you can have cheaper energy to serve the same plant. Your solution is focused on the elements which relates to that. Another element is the cost of construction. Some territories, the cost of construction is at a certain level, and in other territories, it can be double, triple, 5 times more. The construction, the EP, the equipment and the engineering probably will be the same cost for almost every territory, but construction cost is very different from different territories. So again, this is influencing discussions about the OPEX versus the CAPEX, and combine that with the energy cost, combine that with renewable and carbon emission. Definitely, it's a different story in every geography. The fact that you can be an expert to do desalination in a certain point is not necessarily making you very capable of doing the same in the different territories.
So does that mean that you're not just one central company, but you're a bit decentralized to cope for all those specificities with a team in Chile, which is doing with the Chilean specificities?
No, actually, we have global engineering team, which is sitting both in India, in Chile, in the US, and in Israel. That global engineering team actually needs to know not only what is the need in each territory, but actually how we work globally, and we bring ideas from one place to the other.
I see.
So we work as a global team always, but we evaluate the needs of the customers and the specific geography by the local team. But technology-wise, I would even say project-wise, we try to use the same team with the same skills and enjoy from being global.
I have a bit of a crystal ball question for you. If we look 5 years into the future, what is the number one challenge the water sector will have to solve?
I'm not sure I can tell you what is number one, so I'll tell you several.
Fine with me.
One thing which we see is that, talking about desalination, is that the quality of the seas is decreasing. It's not only about whether the ocean is getting warmer or not. It's about how much biomass you have inside the sea, how much contamination you have in the sea. You have algae blooms, you have jellyfish, you have things which are changing in the quality of water. And I think that we're only seeing the beginning of that with the changes in the climate. I think that the sea's quality would continue to change. I don't want to say deteriorate, just change in a way that it will create more challenges to the companies that are operating desalination to make sure that they can handle that. We see that already happening substantially in the Pacific with algae. We see it in the Mediterranean with the jellyfish. We see it in other places. Definitely, this is one challenge which is very, very interesting. Another challenge is what we said about the environmental aspects, because people will realize the more cost will be coming together with carbon emissions, it will drive everybody to try and reduce that. I think that another challenge which is still there is coming from supply chains, because I think that we all understand that globalization had reached its peak and started to go backward. COVID, wars, geopolitical situation make it in a place that you can't really have too complicated supply lines. We have great suppliers from all around the world, and suddenly transportation cost, marine transportation is tripling or much more than that for a certain period. This is a real disruption into the whole supply chain of the whole desalination market. And therefore, I think this is another challenge that needs to be approached by the companies like us, the suppliers, and others, to try and see how we are stabilizing that. Because you started with security, and security means we're not talking only about, can we do it? Is it technology available? What's the cost of that? The question is, can we produce enough water fast enough for all the population which requires that? And that's our real challenge.
You mentioned the challenges. You mentioned how companies like you can solve the challenges. Now I'm shortening the time frame. I'm saying the next 12 months. Within the next 12 months, how can you have a maximum impact as IDE?
I'm sorry to say that, but the most important thing that we're doing in the coming 12 months is talking about it, because I don't think that enough people realize how important it is to address this trend. We have started working on sustainable desalination 3 years ago in our R&D. We are advancing. Some of the solutions are available. Some will be available in the near future. But again, like you said, it will take time also with the customer to say we give it the priority because it's important for us. I think the coming 12 months, in parallel of everything else we're doing, which is new projects in different levels, with more R&D work, with all of that, is education. We need to educate our industry that it is possible. Desalination is a must. Environmental desalination is possible, and it's up to us to take that route.
We need to educate our industry. Can we be more specific? Who do we need to educate?
Actually, all of us. Okay?
Everybody.
We start with the end customers, goes all the way through regulators, through utilities, through developers, financing bodies, everybody. There's no finger to point at a certain way, because in a way we're all linked in a chain. It's a business chain, but also it's much more than that. We are working on something which is critical. We have to make sure that water are available. And you know very well how many people around the world don't have availability of fresh water on a routine base, that it's so simple for them to go to the valve, to turn it, and even feel very comfortable to drink out of the tap. I think it's our mission, all of us together. It's not company-based, it's not even sector-based. It's all of us together. We have to work on making sure that water is available for everybody all the time in a reasonable price, and while protecting our environment in a way that we are not deteriorating the situation more, actually even making it better.
I have a last question for you, and I'm a bit frustrated because I feel we could go on for 1 hour and I have to be cautious every time. The last question is, if you have to define the water sector in 3 words, what are your 3 words?
Well, I'll tell you in 1 word, because I think it's the life. Water sector is about life. Is being able to live, is life quality. Everything around our life starts with water, is one of the base essentials.
That's a perfect one. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I wish you a good continuation in the summit. I think we have to dive deeper together at some point into this topic of sustainable desalination. I'd be super delighted to, for instance, take the plant story when you're up for starting the operation, because I guess that would be a really cool one. And I'm looking forward to that.
We'd love that. Thank you very much. Thanking you for being a great interviewer.
My pleasure.